Today we have a delightful interview with my brother, Tom Lampard. Tom's an optometrist in Red Deer and is carrying on the family tradition of practicing optometrist in Red Deer, which dates back to the day before the twins, Doug and I, arrived in Red Deer in 1940. So it's quite a long story in Red Deer terms. But that's not quite where it begins. If you go back even further, it begins with Mother and Dad and how they, both prairie people, Dad from Calgary and Mother from southern Saskatchewan, ended up taking optometry quite independently, Mother in Toronto and Dad in England. But they both ended up in the late 30s in Winnipeg, studying to write their registration examinations in Winnipeg, and that's how they met. I think at that time, Dad was working as an optometrist in the Hudson Bay Company store, the big store in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
And Mother was working as a private practitioner. And I'm trying to remember the name of the chap who owned the firm that had 5 or 6 optometrists in it. Was Shane?
Jimmy Shane, yeah.
So anyway, that's kind of where the optometric story begins, and perhaps you'd tell them you'd go over some of the features to how they got to Red Deer and why they chose Red Deer, and how it became an endpoint instead of a transition to move back to Calgary as Dad had originally wanted.
Yeah, yes, that's true. She had no desire, I don't think, to go back to Trossachs near Weyburn in Saskatchewan, but he had ambitions of going back to Calgary. That was where he was born, and I mean, he did grow up in many different places, but Winnipeg was a hotbed, I think, back then, and everybody was moving west, and it was the gateway to the west, as it was, and that's true. He was working at the Bay Optical. It was up in the mezzanine at the big Hudson's Bay store, which was recently gifted, I think, by the Hudson's Bay Company to the Indigenous groups, and I went there for a conference in Winnipeg, and had met up with some relatives of his. You
mean of Mr. Shane, or
of Dad's, of Granny's.
Donahue.
Monahue, I think, wasn't it? Monahan.
Yeah.
And they took me around to the Bay Optical because they still went there for their optometric services, and so I went up and met the receptionist at the office, and she immediately offered me a job. I was only about 5 years out of school, if that, I suppose, and so so it was quite an interesting connection, quite a ironic connection, I thought, that.
So you almost ended up working for the Hudson Bay Company.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have been over my...
He would have been one of their great adventurers.
My Mom and Dad's dead body after they'd waited that long for me to get through university and get back and help them out at the office, because they were at that point over their heads trying to keep up. So yeah, no, they met up in Winnipeg. I think there was quite a few optometrists that had graduated from Toronto U of T at that point, and
that's the only school in Canada.
Still, yeah, the
outside
only,
Quebec.
Yeah, the only English-speaking school. So you know, there's been many efforts to open another one, but it's never come to fruition. They've tried many different ways to do it, but it hasn't happened. So as a result, you know, a lot of our grads come from the States, and most of whom are Canadians that go there to get educated. And in my time, a lot of them were Americans who were getting away from, you know, the Vietnam War and all that sort of thing. And a lot of the Vietnam vets actually were going to school at the time I was in Oregon. Interesting group.
And that's how you finished your training.
Yes. graduated from Portland State, from Pacific University. I also went to Portland State for one class, and but Pacific University, yes, in 1981.
How you finished off your optometric training after going to the same school as Dad had in London, England.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so your education is very worldly.
Yes.
To say the least.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot, of course, the profession has come a long way in the last 40 years, so a lot of...
What was it like when you arrived in Red Deer? And that would be in the 1980s?
Yes, 1981 was when I started, and so there was other practices here. There was Titley and Carvel were one, Bannister and Pryor were another. Colin Taylor was one, and he got taken over by Jerry Lineweber and his
So there would be how many optometrists in Red Deer then for a population of, what, 50 or 60,000 then? No, it would be less than that. A little bit less than that.
10, probably 10 optometrists.
10.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you went back to when Mother and Dad arrived in Red Deer, they were the first optometrists.
Well, Snell was here.
But he was an optician.
Was he?
Yeah.
He wasn't an optometrist. He was president of the Optometric Association. He was the first president. I remember Jerry saying, and they kept his name on the door for some period of time after he retired. And the college had come along and said, you know, you can only keep that name on the door for 2 years or something. They said, well, we'd always done it as recognition of the fact that he was our first president, AAO, Alberta Optometric Association president, yeah.
He's a very interesting figure in Red Deer's history. More, you know, not just his horticultural interests and the gardens that he used to maintain on next to the bridge.
Oh, right. That was one and the same, wasn't it?
Yeah,
oh.
was. And then he got his son to take optometry too.
Oh, okay.
Denny Snell came to Red Deer and started the Snell and Titley.
Oh, okay. So that was that was the son, that wasn't the original.
No, that was his son, yeah.
Interesting. I don't know that. So you've been around longer than me.
There really weren't many optometrists in Red Deer when Mother and Dad arrived in 40 for a town of, what, 2,500.
Right. And some of the physicians were doing refracting at that time too. So they had refracting physicians, which we haven't heard of for quite a long time around here. I know that one of my classmates ran into that in Newfoundland. And interestingly, one of them's names was Richler, and he was related to Mordecai Richler.
Oh, really? Of Montreal.
And I think that he was one of the most, one of the biggest opposition or competition, shall we say, a bit of both.
But that raised an interesting point about the relation of optometry and how it's changed so much, you know, including in your time, certainly in Mother and Dad's time. Because I remember Dad saying that he used to examine half a dozen patients that Bill Parsons would refer him from the Parsons Clinic for examinations, particularly. And he said he would pick up some diabetics just from their eye examinations. But that was the state of affairs, and there was no optometrist. I think till the mid-50s, Dr. Simpson arrived, I think, as the first ophthalmologist in Red Deer. And of course that's changed too as Red Deer's grown.
Yes.
But perhaps you'd go over some of the significant changes that have occurred in your time in optometry in Red Deer.
Yes, certainly things were changing very quickly then, and you know, one of the big drivers of that was Dr. Gimbel in Calgary, Howard Gimbel, and I always said that he did more for optometry than anybody else.
Yeah, he was an ophthalmologist in Calgary, and
He was a world-renowned ophthalmologist, yes, and he pioneered implant surgery for cataract patients, and he had really moved that forward. At one point, I think he was doing about a third of all the cataracts that were done in the province, and he was doing so many that they had to put a cap on the number that he could do, because you know, I think that other ophthalmologists at the time were complaining about
cornering the market.
Yeah, yeah, and at that time they were all done in the hospital, so he was the first to move out of the hospital and into a private setting, a private clinic, and he could just go from one operating room to the other and just pivot all day long. I don't know of anybody who has since done what the numbers that he used to do, but he would gratefully accept and welcome our referrals, and he would write great letters back, and I think he kind of let a lot of the other ophthalmologists know that if they wanted to specialize in certain areas, this would be a good way for them to cultivate the relationships and promote what they actually wanted to do. So we eventually got to the point where we could, you know, refer directly to neurology for those cases where you know, you suspected that there was something happening inside their head, behind their eyes, and sometimes we were the only ones to pick that up. We had, I remember one where there was a young fellow, and he was sitting in the chair. He was a four-year-old child, and he was sitting very, very peacefully. You know, you couldn't believe that he's one that had been going to the family physician and to emergency at times with racking headaches, and nobody had been able to pick up what was happening with him, and he'd made several trips, and so you know, that was the sort of case that we wouldn't have seen a lot of, you know, in the early days. That they wouldn't have come to optometrists in the early days. His grandmother was the one who brought him, and she said, you know, they say that sometimes you see things that other doctors don't see, and so once we started,
what did the individual turn out to have? Do you remember?
He had a pseudo tumor cerebri. And he had repeated, this was interesting, he had repeated ear infections. And so the scar tissue in his ear had interfered with the cerebral spinal fluid floating in and out of the ventricles in the brain, so he had a very swollen ventricle. He was, I sent him back to emergency and told him why he was coming. He had papilledema, a swollen optic nerve. They were ready for him when he got there. He went straight to Calgary and had a shunt put in by that evening, and so, you know, it was a good hit. It was a good problem solved for them, and it was a very interesting case for me to find. And you know, other kids who have ear infections, it's not unusual, right? So it was unusual that it followed that way, and the medical people picked that up very quickly after that. So. But nobody looked in his eye, nobody saw the papilledema, so that sort of thing. You know, now that we treat infections, we treat inflammations, iritis, those sort of things that ophthalmologists typically treated, but the access to their offices was not always easy. They'd have to put up with a lot of pain for you know, an interminable amount of time before they got seen. And at this point, a lot of medical clinics refer to us directly. Emergency departments refer to us directly. They just say, you know, you're going to spend a lot of time waiting here. Why don't you just go down the hill and be seen at one of the optometry clinics in Red Deer. And that is just a tremendous change since I started. It was all basically contact lenses and glasses back then.
Well, it strikes me as a bit easier and faster than having the patient go to emerge and having the emerge physician try and figure out how to operate a slit lamp.
Yeah.
When he's probably never done it before.
And you know, to be fair, in those days, medical doctors didn't really know what our education was. I mean, we were educated to do all these things, to see them, to diagnose them, but not to treat them. And so that is what's transpired over, you know, since the 90s, I suppose, over the last 30 years.
Well, I know from you know, stories from Mother and Dad that Dad was very pleased that the optometric program he took in London was 3 years, which included a clinical year, and or at least part of it in the hospital where he could see some of those conditions, whereas Mother never had that opportunity or learning experience and had to learn it as, you know, as her years in ophthalmology or optometry rather expanded. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of Mother, who would never have even recognized it as being significant, but when I was going over some of her life and stories, I was astounded to discover how much education in optometry had changed. She had taken the 2-year, at that time, course in Toronto, and had graduated at age 19 as the top member of her class. Right. Before she was 20. And at this day and age, when there's, you know, pre-optometry, pre-medicine is about 4 years before you can even get in. Yeah. There's been dramatic changes, not just at that level, but in the presentation of the clinical material. Mm-hmm. So is there a close, are there teachers, clinical teachers now then in the Kitchener-Waterloo program that can deal with medical diseases that first appear or appear prominently in the eye, particularly in the fundus and the back of the eye, you know, like diabetes?
Mm-hmm. Well, and their clinical rotations would include all that. You know, those who are there strictly for refractive reasons, and those who would be there for ongoing monitoring of the other conditions, you know, the bacterial, the viral, the inflammatory conditions that they might be seeing. Yeah, certainly the diabetics. That could be monitored before they went back to an ophthalmologist for laser treatment, photocoagulation that they would do. So, but I think that in a bigger way, they do externships, and they go to the States, and they go to veteran schools, they go to Indian Affairs hospitals, and not veteran schools, but veterans hospitals, and they get a real education there, because those places obviously are very busy, and they all do rotations in the States or elsewhere. And they're all working, you know, elbow to elbow with the ophthalmologists there, and they get a tremendous training. And a lot of the heads of those clinics are optometrists now, or graduates of optometry schools. So it's just really infused. The profession has been a huge step towards the medical model, and gradually kind of inching more and more towards that. Even today, you know, in terms of laser treatments for after cataract surgeries, or glaucoma treatments, or that sort of thing that you can lasers or so.
There's certainly been a major change, particularly in the equipping of an office, to the point where optometric offices are, I mean, well equipped, but they're very well equipped as compared to, say, an ophthalmologist's office often. But what are some of the newer tests and so on that you can do and are doing regularly on all of the patients or the people who come to see you? I know that's changed significantly from the time when Mother was promoting eye exercises for strabismus as a solution to that particular problem. There's been certainly huge changes since.
Yes, yeah, and yeah, you know, getting back to Mom and you know, her clinical training, she was quite remarkable in that she, you know, some patients would just say things to her, and she'd just know, you know, if that was serious or if it wasn't. I remember one, and the woman was talking about things, you know, appearing gray and that sort of thing, and she said, you know, that's never a good thing, and I think it was a retrobulbar neuritis at the time, and she, you know, she picked up on a whole bunch of things without instrumentation, you know, which was quite interesting how she just had antennas that would go up. So you know, and for the number of years that she took off practice, all the years that we were growing up, you know, to manage to keep up to it to the extent that she did and still practice as well as she did, you know, later in her career was remarkable, truly. But we, yeah, if she, and she's always been interested in the new equipment. She was so proud when she got the new tonometer, the non-contact tonometer, the air puff, you know, the one that patients hated so much. And we found recently in a practice that we took over that he still had one of the original American Optical NCTs, and that was just like getting shot with a gun. You know, the patient would recoil off the back of the chair. There was no avoiding it. And you know, sometimes it was hard for the technician to not laugh with some of these reactions, but I mean, nowadays they're so soft, they get very little reaction, and she was so proud of the field testing that the field testing equipment that she got that was, there was computerized, you know, it would spit out a result. It was very early on. It was a Humphrey machine, and she picked up a lot of glaucomas with that at an earlier stage where, you know, not necessarily as easy as the pressure just going up, but it was the field deteriorating first. So she was quite progressive that way, more so than Dad. You know, he didn't really want to spend the money on it, and you know, he thought you could see it in other ways. And of course, you know, there's both sides of the profile that way. You know, some are more on one side and some are more on the other, and don't really see the need in the new equipment. But the digital photography is really the biggest thing now, that we can take such good pictures of the inside of the eye through even through cataracts, you know, even through you know, opacities that would really limit your ability to see it otherwise. I mean, you can dilate the eye, you can do all these things, but they take tremendous pictures, and they go a long way out into the periphery, and more than that, you can go right into the central retina, the fovea, and go behind that. You can go layers behind that. So they have the OCT, the optical coherence tomography, that we'll look at each layer of the retina in behind, and you'll pick up macular conditions quite readily there, and it just makes for, you know, I mean, some of those we can treat and some of those we can't. You know, if you got wet macular, well, it needs to go to an ophthalmologist. If you got dry macular, well, there's not really any point. You might as well follow him, monitor him yourself, and treat it with the antioxidants that are shown to work quite well. But you can really separate the, you know, what you need to do, what needs to be done for the patient, what the ophthalmologist needs to do, and send them to the right person first. It's not like you're sending them to in the old days you had to send them to the medical doctor, tell him why tell the medical doctor why you were sending them, and then have him send them to the ophthalmologist. And it wasn't long after all these things started to turn around that they were saying, so who do you send? The medical doctor was asking us, well, who do you send one of these to and one of these to? And the next thing, the relationships between the medical and the medical related professions are so much better than they ever were.
Is that true across Canada, like not just in Red Deer or Alberta?
Alberta's always been a leader. You know, so we've always fought for the advances that the Americans were gaining, you know, through legislation, through being covered by insurance companies and costing the insurance companies a lot less. We wanted the same things that they had, and so Alberta was generally leading the way with a really aggressive and ambitious bunch in our association.
And they've recently written a history of their first 100 years.
Right. Yeah.
So I look forward to reading.
Yeah. Did I not give you that?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I was having to look for it here the last few days and I couldn't find it. So I will get a copy for you, and you can look at that. Some of the things you'd be happy about. Some of them you wouldn't, as she was writing it, and we were going back and forth with the author of that. They
Well, I
did a reasonable job.
The reason I raised that is just to put mother and dad, not to be too personal about it, but as a couple, both being optometrists and practicing for their lifetime, that's unusual. Perhaps it's a little more common now, just like physicians marrying physicians, but it was pretty unusual in mother and dad's day. Mm-hmm. And then to practice for a lifetime, I think the total number of years they practiced, although mother was by invitation only for quite a while, but it was over 100 years.
That was 56 years each.
Yeah.
Yeah, she graduated a year ahead and he practiced a year longer.
But
that's a lot of years in any.
Well, and
other than if you're a farmer.
I remember when I think maybe one of them retired, or one of the clinic's occasions, there was a mention of the number of patients that had come in to see them, and the monitor was the number of cards they had on different people, because they made up one on every one, and it was well over 50,000, and at that time that was equivalent to Red Deer's population, if not in excess of it.
Yeah.
But it was also unusual in that there are other couples who married, practiced optometry through their lifetimes and so on, but they usually are familiar with the story of mother and dad and the number of years they practiced together. Mm-hmm. Usually with some almost a challenge, but certainly a lot of respect. And I think of it from the Red Deer perspective. There's continuity attached to their life in Red Deer. One of the great fortunes, I guess, is that they never left Red Deer, never did go to Calgary.
Right.
And ended up contributing significantly to the community of Red Deer, well beyond their own professional practices, just as you have. And are there any highlights or in your avocational activities that you'd like to kind of share with us? Some of the things you've been involved in that you've enjoyed or had some impact on?
Yeah, well, it's been, it's funny to look at some of those things and remember what it was like, and start writing some of the details down and thinking of all the things you've forgotten about or you hadn't thought about for a long time. But we all felt as optometrists that we had to get involved politically to achieve some of these gains. And so they said we had a good bunch on council back then, and I joined the Optometric Association at that time. I think it wasn't very many years into it when I got on the registration board. I thought it was unreasonably difficult to get into the province at the time, but you were coming in from the States or England or elsewhere. But gradually stayed on council, and we got on the lobbying committee, and so we had the ear of a number of Ralph Klein's ministers, and the inner six, one of whom was Stockwell Day in our Red Deer North Constituency Association. So that was actually quite a lot of fun to be working with him through those years, and in return he would let us know what was happening, with optometry, with the other professions, where the government was going, where it was thinking, and so with them and about 6 or 10 of us, we managed to get a lot of those things accomplished through them.
You mean legislatively and
yes,
through regulations and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And interestingly, they they said at one point, I think they let it out that optometrists would soon be prescribing medications for eye diseases, and what the public heard when they heard that was that you could now go to the optometrist to get it. We weren't even licensed at that point, and we didn't have the legislation at that point. So,
or the training.
Well, we had the training. We
Yeah.
had the training, but it was at one point we went 5 years, between the end of all these classes and hours and exams that we'd put in, at the U of A or at the in Oklahoma at Northeastern College of Optometry, and we were getting a little desperate. 5 years without using this, and so all of a sudden they let it be known, and I just started writing the prescriptions, and the pharmacists would start filling them. There was no problem, and so it was interesting times. You knew it was going to come about, and it was going to come to fruition, but it had been such a long battle.
Was that a precedent in Canada?
Yes. Precedent?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely it was. Yeah, nobody else had that.
So Alberta was the first province to allow
Yes.
legally.
And it made it a lot easier
sanction
for
that.
others. Probably Saskatchewan was the second, because they were coming to all the same programs, educational programs that we were. BC not so much, but Saskatchewan sure was, because they couldn't put on as many programs, as many hours of continuing education as we could. They didn't have the population or the number of optometrists. So they, just like they support the Eskimos and the Flames, they supported optometry.
Well, or they moved to Alberta and support the Rough Riders.
That's right.
More cheers for the Rough Riders in Calgary than for the Stampeders.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just about, eh? So the years in optometry and in the Red Deer North Constituency Association, they were all good. They were all good. They were busy years, and they were fun. They were a great group of people to work with from all over the province. And their MLAs, Jim Dinning, he said, "You're an optometrist, aren't you?" Start talking to him, and they just got to know you,
Yeah.
So it was we were a bit relentless back in the day. So that was good. That was good. The Kinsman, we were quite involved in Kinsman. I think I naturally gravitated towards that because Dad, Mom,
because you
and
weren't
Dad,
40.
I wasn't 40. Yeah, I wasn't too old. So I remember telling somebody, it ended at age 40. It's not so much that way now. You can carry on in Kinsman as long as you feel the energy to do that,
Well, there were some very significant projects that you were involved with.
It was
in the community.
Yeah. Red Deer was we raised a lot of money, and the Dream Home was a pet project of ours that put a lot of money back into the community. We did the Man in Motion. We hosted Rick Hansen when he was doing the Man in Motion tour in the 80s. We helped out a number of organizations, from the food bank to the women's shelter to those. We moved on in the year after I was president. We moved on. Bob Pittman became the provincial governor of the Kinsman Association. So we served on his committee, and I was service director in charge of different fundraising, but mostly as it had to do with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. So we worked quite closely with them, and we raised more money than anybody else in the country. Kinsman being
the Alberta Kinsman did, or Red Deer?
Alberta Kinsman. Yeah. Because Kinsman, of course, was a totally Canadian service organization, young men's service organization, and started in Canada after World War I by Hal Rogers. Hal Rogers?
Yeah, that's correct. Around 1930.
Thinking that was who's the Rotary? Will Rogers? Is it Will? Who's the Rotary
Will
award?
Rogers, I think, is an American, I would say, philosopher, but
Well, you get a
Paul,
you get
the equivalent in Rotary would be Paul Harris.
oh, Harris
Started Rotary, but you were involved in kind of by name or otherwise. The community has recognized the Kinsmen, and particularly in the field of hockey and arenas. Red Deer has what, 3 of them that the club was involved in fostering, creating, and with the city building.
Right, right, and that was a little bit before my time. To be fair, that was the Kinex building and the Kin City A and B building arenas. Yeah, that was another big Kinsman project. The Kin Canyon was another. Those are all a little bit ahead of my time. I'm not that old.
But the important thing is they still exist. They're still being used. They're still such an important part of the community.
Yeah.
Whichever club picks up the challenge or sees the opportunity, then follows through and completes it. Yeah, I remember Father saying when there was a cutoff at age 40, and you graduated in Kinsman to K40s, which is really just a party program. But he ended up having to switch to the Rotary Club because that was the next most active service club in the community, and stayed with it, of course, for many years.
And yeah, he never dropped the K40. But it was just a dinner meeting once a month. After that, it wasn't a fundraising or project related organization. As the Kinsman Club was, their numbers have dwindled somewhat. K40 would help on a number of projects as they could. When they started getting run by a computer, that eliminated a lot of people who didn't have the computer skills. But and those computer skills are, eliminated the need for a lot of people too. So they got things done so much faster than we used to.
Yeah.
They could do it with fewer people, and pretty efficient club. Yeah.
Well, you were carrying on a tradition that. Both Mother and Dad were actively involved in Kinsmen and Kinettes and in some of the projects, particularly after the war. Some of the activities they got involved in, and they've grown since. And, just part of that tradition. I remember how important it was to Dad to give back to your community, because, of course, that's where you professionally raised, contributed, and people came in to see you as patients and so on, and you always felt an obligation to give back to the community, because that's what made your practice.
I remember one fellow he was a home builder in town, and he said that when his kids were asked what he did, he said he builds houses and he's a kinsman. And it was very much a family affair. The wives were involved. The kids had kid camps and ball tournaments that were all Kinsman related. All clubs coming together from campouts. They had quite a group of friends that were all within the club, and some of them grew up to be Kinsmen in their own right as time went on. So as their turn came,
well, it becomes a parental example, and I guess a philosophy that families can evolve, develop by sharing those experiences with their kids, and it just flows rather naturally.
It is natural, and it carries on for a lifetime. The friends that we had then are still very good friends now. The friends that our kids had then are tend to still be really good acquaintances, if not friends, still now. So it's good to start your kids off doing that kind of thing. A lot of people say that they don't have time to do that because they've got kids and families, and we just incorporated them, and they like that. It was another really good source of activities for them.
Well, and it's very rewarding, not just from the people you meet or the social activities that go along with it, but the accomplishments as well.
Right.
Always remember Dad's philosophy that be satisfied with what you accomplish, not the recognition that goes with it.
Yes.
And that's very, very true.
Yeah.
You have to satisfy yourself first.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, the flip side of that too is I think that a lot of people do a lot of things that they don't get recognized for, and you know, it's nice to get the recognition, and some people seek that a lot more than others. But it is nice to have contributed something that others couldn't or wouldn't. And
That's a nice note to end on, Tom. And as saying, the families have become well known in the community as, "Are you the eye doctor?" As people, you know, repeatedly ask me.
yeah.
I have to tell them, no, I'm not, and they're always surprised.
Well, then they always came in every year and asked me how many mountains I'd climbed this summer. And at one point, I think that we had Mount Davidson and Kilimanjaro at pretty much the same time. So they were both notables for sure. And so the question still gets asked.
Well, the tradition continues.
It's more yours than mine.
So it'll be, yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thanks for joining us, Tom.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks for
asking.
Thanks for the chat,
Yeah.
and
Interesting to
going
reflect.
over